Education in Africa is often a problem, still lagging far behind with an estimated 70% literacy rate. That's opposed to world averages, which are closer to 90%. The African Union says this is despite attempts by governments on the continent to eradicate illiteracy. Folly Bah Thibault is a journalist and advocate for education in Africa. She joins us to talk about UN initiatives to improve reading and writing on the continent, and your foundation as well, which is focused on education. Folly, firstly, it's very good to see you. I know you've come off a night shift at Jazeera, and I know how hard that is, so I really appreciate it. I'm sure in the part of Africa where you are, Guinea and surrounding areas, very similar to what we experience here in South Africa when it comes to education. Tell us what you found during this time and why it's so important to educate women.
Well, Jane, as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has had really a catastrophic impact on education everywhere, in every part of the world, but especially for children in poor communities and conflict zones who were already struggling before the crisis to attend school. And many today, we found during this crisis, don't have the luxury of taking part in distance learning, since most of them don't even have access to laptops or internet connection. And also for many of these children, and I take the example of my home country, Guinea, school was not just a place of learning, school was a refuge, a place of shelter, because many of these children from disadvantaged families went to school also to get their main meal of the day. Some of the mothers that we work with, that we help at our foundation, work at the market or sell fruits at the market. But during the lockdowns, they couldn't go out and therefore couldn't even earn that $1 or $2 a day that they were earning before the crisis to feed their children. So it was extremely difficult for many of these families. It wasn't just a question of learning anymore, but also in many cases of survival, because many of these young girls weren't able to have their daily meal because school was the way for them to do that. So I found it's been an extremely challenging situation for all of us, of course, who have children, as you know. But we at least are lucky enough to be able to give our children distance learning because we have access to internet, we have electricity. But the majority of children, especially in our African countries, in these poor communities, in rural communities, aren't able to learn and sometimes aren't able to eat.
Folly, why do you think it's such an issue in so many African countries, and why there isn't more of an emphasis placed on educating girls and women, because their role in society is crucial to success?
Indeed. I mean, because I guess, you know, it goes back to the fact that we live really in patriarchal societies and still today in many of our African cultures in African countries. I mean, a good quality education for young girls is still one of the major challenges of our generation. And international experts agree that educating a girl can kickstart an economy, can kickstart a lasting circle of development. But in many of our African countries, girls are still seen as a burden, while men are seen as the main providers of the family. So when families are in very difficult situations, when they have barely enough to eat, and if they have a choice of putting their girls or boys in schools, they will go for the boy rather than the girl, perhaps thinking also that, if they marry this young girl at an early age, then she wouldn't be a burden on them anymore and would be able to maybe have a better life outside of her own family. And we've found in many instances, the UN there are many reports about this, that education, in fact, is a way of ending child marriage on our continent. In my home country of Guinea, 22% of young girls at the age of 15 are already married because their families think that this is a way for them to have a more secure life. But in fact, it's not the case, because they end up, having children at a very early age, which then has consequences on their health, on their well-being. They can't decide for themselves. They can't decide their future. They can't decide how many children they have. And that's why I wanted to focus on girls' education, because still today, in the 21st century, in many parts of Africa, women are still disadvantaged.
But to get what you want, you have to get the buy-in from men. How do you make that happen?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we can't talk about gender equality, women's empowerment, and women's rights to education and so on without involving men in the conversation. We can't talk about ending gender-based violence without involving men in the conversation. And promoting gender equality and educating girls is also about changing the mindsets of our societies. unfortunately. It's about getting men into the conversation and explaining and changing the mindsets and, perhaps leaving behind some of our traditions and cultures. One of the difficulties I've encountered, especially in Africa, is that we're often, bound by our traditions and culture and even religion to a certain point where these are entrenched in our daily lives, and it's very difficult to break away from it because a lot of people, even educated people, still believe that, men don't belong in the kitchen. Men shouldn't be the ones taking care of children. I think if we involve men in the conversation and have male role models like you have in South Africa with Siya Kolisi, who's also a UN advocate for violence against women and girls, if we involve them in the conversation, if we have powerful voices, influential voices, male voices like that, to carry the message, then maybe that will start changing the mindsets of men. Because if we start changing the mindsets and the way of thinking of men, then we would have made a great step forward in achieving gender equality.
Absolutely. And Folly, briefly, if you will, I mean, we work together on Al Jazeera. It's a very powerful platform internationally. How important is that sort of platform to doing the work that you do? And I mean, you come from a family of 4 girls. You received your own bit of grief over that.
5 girls before. I lost a sister, but my mom had 5 girls. And I'm not going to lie to you. I don't come from a disadvantaged family. I had an education. I had, my parents were well-traveled and so on. But still, there was the tradition. And the tradition was that a family, especially a male-born, had to have heirs, male sons who would carry on the family name. So when my poor mother ended up with 5 girls, people pitied her. Oh my God, this poor woman, what is she going to do with 5 girls? And this was, in the 1980s. The mentalities are changing slowly and surely, but they're still there. Men are still privileged. So for me, it was extremely important because my mother, in fact, gave up her career to make sure that we had an education because she understood that our empowerment and our independence started by giving us and helping us get a good education. And today, I'm working for this big international news network. A lot of young African girls see me as a role model, and I need to use that platform, and I need to use this international platform that I have to help them also have the life that I have in a certain way, because I feel extremely lucky. Things could have been different for me if I'd been, raised in a village in a rural, isolated rural area of Guinea, or if I'd stayed in Guinea.
And Folly, we're going to have to leave it there. And thank you for using that platform, and very good to talk to you. Thanks, Folly.